All right, and we are live. Hello and welcome to what is, I guess, the second episode now of an interview with Grandma. I haven't come up with a better name for it yet. I'm Spencer Powell. I'm sitting down and interviewing my grandmother, Elda Marie Pope Thatcher Lewis Hatch, about her life. Today's date is August 8th. So let me double check this. It might be August 9th. I'm not sure. It is August 9th of 2015. Last episode we talked a lot about your early childhood. Got up through I think like kindergarten and early grade school. We are continuing along a list that was given to me by my aunt, your daughter, Janet. And as we continue on with this, it goes right into high school from here. So, where and in what years did you go to high school?
Well, my grades corresponded to the years. I was in the ninth grade in 39, 10th grade in 40, and 12th grade 42. Graduated from high school in 42, and so anyway, I thought that was just one of those cute little incidental things.
Yeah, it was always fun to have a nice thing. Anyway, coincidences like that are fun. Where did you go to high school?
Provo High School.
Yeah.
And the Provo High School was then where the Provo City office buildings are now.
So that's Center Street and about 300 West in Provo. Is where the city buildings are now.
Yeah.
At the old high school. Where did you live during this time?
I'm trying to remember what this time is because we moved up on 10th North in a basement house that Daddy had built from a big house down on 3rd South and 340 something West. And it was nice just knowing that we were in the house that Daddy built, even if it was cramped and crowded with all of us in the basement. And I think last I went by that area, Provo City, bought the place from Mother after Daddy died.
Uh-huh.
I think it was marked as 960 North instead of 10th North. I had re-evaluated the distance between streets.
But the house itself is gone at this point.
It is gone, yes.
Okay. Again, a lot of these I'm just going to quote. In fact, all of the questions I'm quoting verbatim, but I like to give them a little flourish. Now, I'd like you to think back to an incident in high school which you remember well. Just any one incident. What was going on?
What would junior high school do?
Sure.
Okay. It was kind of one of those science experiment things that went wrong, and he was doing something with ether, and anybody that had been exposed to ether previously would be more affected by it, and I didn't want to admit that I'd been exposed to ether as an anesthetic for surgery, and I didn't say anything, but I got pretty sick.
That's no good. Were you out of school for a while after that, or did you just sleep it off for a night?
That day, I mean, I was in probably either 8th or 9th grade, and I was all right after I got some fresh air.
Oh. Dangerous chemicals they use in schools.
But it's no fun being sick when you can't hide it.
Yeah. What about one in high school? Can you think of an incident with friends or something similar?
One of the things I do remember, and it's kind of silly now, but um, there was one couple that had been real close through junior high and high school, and you never see one on campus without the other one. I'm not at all sure they were all they were in the same classes all the time, but just out on campus, you just didn't see them separately. She passed away just the past few months, and I wonder how Max is doing. It's Marie Roundy and Max Hansen, and I think the whole school is aware of the romance between those two because they were constantly together.
Yeah.
And it seemed to be a very, very comfortable relationship.
Mm.
They did marry right out of high school.
Unsurprising, I'm sure.
It didn't surprise anybody, I don't
Nope.
think. In fact, all of us girls kind of wished we had somebody that cared that much about us.
Sure. What were your grades like in high school?
Just a little bit above average. Not amazing, but good.
Yeah. What subjects or teachers did you particularly enjoy?
Um, I only remember one that I didn't like, and he was one that would catch a student maybe daydreaming a little or something, and see was that he was out daisy picking. I mean, this student wasn't. I mean, he liked to embarrass people. Well, I don't know that he was conscious that he liked doing it, but he did it.
Yeah.
Just what it appeared was that he was just trying to embarrass anybody that wasn't right there at the moment of his desiring to
Interact with them.
that
Yeah.
particular student.
Were there any subjects that you were particularly fond of?
I liked English and had a class that I think it was identified as speech. Well, another one was youth problems. Can you imagine a high school class title as being youth problems?
Right. Nowadays, yes, but it kind of surprises me that there was one
That long ago.
back in the 40s.
But it was a very popular class, and it was taught by a teacher that was well respected. And it was anyway, you could express your opinion in his class without being made a fool of. But not all teachers were like that.
Yeah. But it's nice that he was.
But he was, yes, it was nice that he was.
Yeah. What social group did you belong to in high school? What kind of kids did you associate with?
Mostly the ones that I walked to and from school with, and they were the ones that lived between where I did and the high school.
Yeah. And what kind of group were you? I mean, we're in Provo, Utah, so it kind of.
It's jungle girls and all Mormons.
Yeah. It gives you an idea of. I mean, just knowing the location gives you an idea of the type of people, I guess. Okay. Who were your best friends during high school?
Iva Snell and Phyllis Booth.
Yeah. Are you still in contact with either of them, or have they both passed on at this point?
They both passed on now, but Iva died quite young. In my feelings, she probably was in her early 50s, although I don't remember for sure. And Phyllis just passed away in the past year.
Yeah. Now you said Ivis Nell, Phyllis
Uh,
Booth. Was that their married name, or was that the
uh,
name they went by?
Iva didn't marry. Her
Oh,
father was a professor at BYU. She was just an absolutely wonderful person, but she was a little bit large, not a really fat girl, but just big. And somehow the boys didn't seem to be interested in a girl that was bigger than they were.
that's unfortunate.
Yeah.
What about Phyllis?
Phyllis married before I did, and she told just kind of a joke, I can't marry you to the men that she eventually married because Phyllis Phillips would sound silly because her name was Phillips and with Phyllis and his last name was Phillips.
But she
But
did end up marrying
she
him.
ended up marrying him.
Oh, that's nice. Um, did you play any sports during high school?
My only sport was walking to and from school. It was a city mile each way, and I went home for lunch.
Oh, wow. So you got a good 4 miles in every day.
Uh,
Were there any like physical education classes or anything that were mandatory at the time that you had to
they
take?
were, and I hated them
Oh, that's
because I just wasn't good at stuff like that.
yeah. Okay. Well, here we go. This is a fun one. Who was the first boy you ever seriously kissed? How old were you, and what were the circumstances?
Oh boy, that one's really getting. Where do we go from here? I guess Max Hatch was the first boy that I was really serious about, and he didn't get serious about me until much later. So there just wasn't, when I was in high school, there
Hmm.
was no romance. And I felt bad about it. I would have
Aw.
loved to have had a high school sweetheart.
Who was your first kiss then? Was Max the first kiss or?
I think he was.
Hmm.
I'll take that back to a certain extent. My Uncle Bob was just 6 months older than I, and we occasionally would just make, as a joke, I wouldn't let the boys kiss me, but I'd let Bob do it
Hmm.
in the same company.
Just to annoy them.
Uh,
That's fun. Did you attend your senior prom if there was one?
there was one, and I don't remember that I had a date for it. I missed it.
Oh.
I was a wallflower or something worse.
Well then, this is an odd question, but if you could have changed one thing about your high school years, what would it have been?
I think if I could have changed, I would have liked to have had a boyfriend that was willing to be in the same school with me, willing to be known as my boyfriend.
Yeah. Okay. During this time, what was going on in your family while you were in high school?
Well, I was in high school when when Daddy built the basement house that we lived in for a while before he was able to to build the house on top of the basement. And the adjustment from a big rented house down on 3rd South, it was 340 something West, 3rd South here in Provo, uh, to the basement with just 2 bedrooms. That was tight fitting.
Yeah.
But because it was our home instead of a rented home, it felt good.
I'm sure. Which of your siblings were born during your high school years, if any of them were?
I wish I remembered that better. It shouldn't be that hard to figure out. Um, Arnold was 8 years younger than I, and Charles 10 years younger. So that ought to. Oh, and then there was Teddy.
Mm-hmm.
Teddy was 2 years younger than Charles, and when he was 8 years old, and I was off cross country with George. There was a farm accident. I mean, an accident where he got behind a horse and got kicked in the stomach, and doctor wasn't very smart. He was aware that Teddy's blood pressure was going down, yet he did nothing to try to find out where that blood was going.
Hmm.
And it wasn't until after Teddy had passed away that Daddy insisted on an autopsy to find out what it was. And the blood had, anyway.
Some internal bleeding.
It was internal bleeding.
Yeah.
I was in Corpus Christi, Texas, where George was in the Navy when that happened.
Now, did your family take vacations?
There were a couple of times that we went to Fish Lake as a family, and rented a cabin down there.
And where is Fish Lake?
Fish Lake is in Utah. It's high up in the mountains.
North, south, east, or west? Or central? Could be central Utah as well.
Well, I don't know how to locate it because don't remember looking at a map as to where it was, but it's down south of Richfield and up in the mountains.
Okay.
I think Loa was probably the closest town to the lake.
Okay. And last one in talking about your high school years, how would you sum up your childhood and adolescence?
My childhood was remarkably happy because there was always peace and love expressed at home. Daddy loved to sing and play the harmonica, so there was homemade music in the home too. And we didn't have a piano, and none of us played except Mother, and she didn't have time because she's too busy. But she had learned to play the piano at home before she married. But I don't think she ever played really well. So it wasn't something that was, that she had fun doing because she hadn't got that proficient at it. What was the question again?
Just how would you sum up at this point, your adolescence? Teenage years.
It was happy times. My brother was 2 years older than I, 23 months. He delighted in some teasing that was a little bit rough, but not real bad. He liked to flip me with a dish towel, but sometimes it sting pretty good.
I'm sure.
And of course, it was fun. He got a kick out of my squealing.
Mm-hmm.
But most of the time, he was very, very good to me. My sister Arlene was 19 months younger than me, but she was a bigger build. I was kind of a little kid. And so because I was older, I thought I should be the boss when Mom and Dad weren't around. And she wouldn't take that.
Sure.
So we had some conflict.
Yeah. But still primarily happy.
Yep.
Okay. Now we're going to take a bit of just a pause here before we start heading into and talking more about your adult life and your married life. Those of you who are watching live, what I'm about to say won't work if you're watching on a mobile device, a cell phone, or the like. However, if you are watching us via the desktop app. You should be able to, up in the about just right of center, you'll see a grid there. And if you click on that grid and go to Q&A, that should pop open a dialog on the very far right of your screen that will allow you to submit questions. I have the list here of questions that I'm watching currently, of any questions that are submitted, and I will pass those along. So yeah, we can go get some questions from the audience as well. We have a whole one audience right now, and that's fantastic.
We have what?
A whole one audience right now. Okay, so let's continue on through our questions here. Did you attend any college or vocational school once you graduated high school?
I took a few classes, but I wasn't serious about it.
Where did you take those classes?
At BYU.
BYU, okay. Did you serve in the armed forces at all?
No.
Okay.
But every man I was interested in did.
This is true. We can talk more about them as life continues, or as the questions continue. We continue to go through your life. Whatever it was that I meant to say there, I'm not entirely sure. So with those two things in mind, that it wasn't military and it wasn't for higher education, when did you leave home? Under what circumstances? Where did you go?
Oh, I didn't leave home until I went to meet. Oh, wait a minute. I'm trying to remember. Anyway, I was still living at home, and George was in the military when we married.
Mm-hmm.
And so when he was in a situation where he was able to have his wife with him, I was down in Corpus Christi. I met him in Corpus Christi, Texas, and we got an apartment there.
Very nice.
Actually, there's kind of a silly mixed-up thing that happened there. He had arrangements, and he had answered an ad, and he thought that the family wanted a nanny for their two children, and he applied for the job for me, and that included housing for both of us. And when I got there, met the family, and they made it very plain that one of my duties was to be available to their male guests. That was not something I could live with.
I'm surprised it's something they could live with, but let's not judge others.
Well, it was a totally different society. Something, I just didn't have any idea people lived that way. But
Yeah.
I found out. So I didn't stay there.
Yeah. Probably for the best then. But let's talk about your marriages. Just because that's the way.
Aren't you?
No, that's the way it's listed
Let's
in here.
start with one.
We'll start with the first and talk about them as we do. So let's start, of course, with
George Thatcher.
Yeah, the father of all of your children.
Right.
Obviously, when, where, and how did you meet?
This is kind of, how do I remember at this late date how I first met him? I come up with something that he told me later. Or was that one of the Hatches that told me that? Okay. Anyhow, I remember being told that George told Max Hatch's little brother that Elda may be your brother's girlfriend now, but she's the girl I'm going to marry. And of course they didn't pay attention to that sort of thing, but it made a good story.
I'm sure. Now that must have been after you had met, though. So where did you first meet him?
He he was a close friend of a boy that Arlene was dating,
Mm-hmm.
and there was a very traumatic, serious accident that happened before I started dating George. Uh, he was the driver of a car. He was coming home from having a late date, had a friend, and he was taking home a man friend, and but it was very late, about 2 o'clock morning, and in Orem, we know now where the Sierra Theater is still where it was then,
Oh yeah.
but there wasn't businesses and stuff much around it yet.
Mm-hmm.
And the highway was, I think, 2 lanes in each direction, but just barely.
Yeah.
And he was coming home that late after a night with other people, and there were no real street lights in that area at the time, and there was a group of young people. How many were in the group, I don't know that I ever knew for sure, but they were spread out clear across the highway, but the lights didn't pick them up until they were right where
On
they
top
were,
of them,
kind
basically.
of
Yeah.
sort of thing. And so when George was driving and he didn't see these kids spread out clear across the highway, they were apparently somewhat inebriated too, which didn't help because they run in different directions.
Yeah.
And he went off the highway in order to avoid hitting them, but they ran the same direction he did. He went. I mean, a couple of them did, and in the collision, a serviceman and his date died after that collision. So it was a very traumatic situation, and the judge that was willing to hear the whole story dismissed the case as insufficient evidence to prove that George was at fault. But the governor, not actually looking into what happened, made the public statement that it looks like there was a miscarriage of justice down in Provo, and called for greater prosecution of the driver.
Mm.
After the judge had decided there was insufficient evidence to put the blame on him.
Yeah. How did that turn out?
It was, well, he was supposed to, he was just home on leave from the military. No, not home on leave. It was kind of a leave between the time he was inducted and the time he was to report to duty.
Uh-huh.
And so, of course, the fact that he needed to report for duty was misinterpreted by the press.
As him trying to run away?
Yeah.
Hmm.
So it was a pretty messy situation.
Yeah. Now, we do have to mention the house that we're in now, which is really the old Thatcher homestead, is only a few blocks away from that big house you said you rented there on 3rd South and
3rd South and 345 West or
West.
something like that.
Do you remember during that time, did you know the Thatchers at all?
No, I didn't.
No. Well then, that answers that one quickly. Um, let's talk more about you and George. What was your first date?
Well, I knew his boyfriend better than I knew him, and I had not been dating the boyfriend for some time, and he had another girlfriend by then. So uh, he was the one that sort of invited George to go along where I don't remember the details really yet, but somehow George and I were in the same group for a group date,
Uh-huh.
and we just seemed to hit it off quite well.
Yeah. Do you remember where the group went?
No, I don't.
Hmm. Sorry.
Probably just A&W.
Yeah. But as you continued on from there, what was your courtship like?
I think I felt sorry for him because his dad was such an ornery old son of a gun. And it took me an awful long time to get to the point that I could even like his father at all. His daughters adored him. So I
Uh-huh.
thought there had to be something good about him. I just needed to look deeper to find it because he was so totally different from my father. Because if any of us kids got in any kind of trouble, Daddy was somebody you could talk to, and he'd be thoughtful and good about it. But Grandpa Thatcher was, I couldn't see anything good in anything he did in his relationship with his children, but the girls adored him, so there had to be something special there that I didn't see. And here I am living in his home.
Yeah. Did something right anyway. Um, so how long was your courtship, or specifically, how long after you met did you get married?
Year and a half or so.
Yeah.
Really don't remember an awful lot except that we were married in 44 and I graduated from high school in 42.
Yeah. Tell us a bit about what was going on, what had to happen for the marriage to actually take place, because it's, as I recall, there was a bit of an adventure that happened,
Yeah, there was quite an adventure.
especially since George at the time was on active enlistment, active duty.
Yes, his his schooling at that time was in Logan. It was just a temporary kind of thing,
Uh-huh.
and a special radar class. And he had already studied radar, so he was doing very well in this Navy. I mean, he was in the military, in the Navy, and but he. I just remembered something that I hadn't thought about for a long time.
What's
When
that?
he was being charged with involuntary manslaughter, the
Mm-hmm.
death of those two kids, and he was before a judge, and just to be of support to him, I would go to those hearings, and the judge, after seeing me with him several times. He offered his services for our wedding.
Oh.
And
That was before you had started dating, though,
neither
wasn't it?
George or I was even considered that we would marry.
At that point.
By then, it just hadn't. It just wasn't there. Oh, it's funny.
Yeah. Now, when you did get married, it was up in Logan. It was at the Logan Temple. Is that correct?
Yes.
And
it took some special doing, both the cooperation of the people at the temple as well as the military, to allow us to have a time when the temple would be open. They did a special endowment session just for us.
Yeah.
Because we couldn't get the military to cooperate with us to hit
any of the regular sessions.
Any regular sessions at the temple, so they did a special endowment session for us to be married in the temple.
Was there any type of reception afterwards?
That was another one. Actually, my mother couldn't be with us because she'd had a premature baby.
Yeah.
Just a few days before our wedding.
Yeah.
So a few weeks later, we had a small reception at my parents hosted, but they did it here because our home at that time was just a basement.
Yeah. Okay. I want to talk more about George, because I personally don't know that much about him. He obviously passed away long before I was born. But before we do that, we did have a question come in. The name associated with it is Loyal Lim.
Oh, for goodness sakes.
Yeah. The question is stated, I've seen a picture of Elda and Laura Lim when they were teenagers. I think it was taken in Randolph. How often did you go to visit Randolph?
Not very often. It was financially difficult. We would have liked to have done it a lot more than we did.
Uh-huh.
But and when Mother and Daddy went to Randolph, the rest of the family didn't go, except because my sister Arlene and I got along like bulldogs. They would take her with them for the safety of the rest of us.
I see. That makes sense. Okay. So now let's talk, and we might end up just, let's see, how much time do we have? We've got about 20 minutes left. We might just end up spending the rest of this time talking about George Thatcher here. As much, of course, as you can remember, but he do you know where he went to high school?
He was actually, he I think was in the 10th grade when he joined the military.
Oh, yeah?
So he got his high school equivalency or whatever it was for military training.
And was that also the bulk of his higher education, his beyond high school education, was military training and such?
Well, no, he went to BYU and got a master's degree in vocational education.
Okay. Now, obviously, the military.
He did that with the GI Bill.
Yeah. Okay. But obviously, we talked about how he did serve in the armed forces. Do you know what branch was he in?
In the Navy. The Navy. I was trying to remember. was a name for the special schooling. It won't come to me.
Let's see, the ones I can think of now would be like ROTC or
It wasn't that kind of.
officers training or something. I don't know.
It wasn't officers training, but it was technology. Electronic technology.
So what was his primary jobs after he completed the training?
It had something to do with getting the enemy's electronics to lie to them.
That actually sounds very interesting.
And it was very technical, but it was very. It took a great deal of skill in order to pull that one off.
Oh, I'm sure. Now, what were the circumstances of his enlistment, if you know them?
He didn't want to be drafted into the Army. He chose to enlist in the Navy, but every young man that was physically and mentally capable was expected to serve during that period of time.
Yeah, this was
World War II.
World War II. Was this right at the beginning of the war or somewhere near the middle? It's early in the war. So where did he serve primarily during the war?
At Ward Island in Corpus Christi, Texas. And his duty there was teaching electronics.
Okay.
George was a very good teacher.
Yes.
I got that from a lot of different sources.
Yeah. Well, this is a great time to talk about it. Talk about his career and his work that way.
Well, I wish I knew how to portray it like it should be done.
That's all right. Well, after he, I assume, when did he leave military service and under what circumstances?
I really don't remember. I think he served the amount of time he was supposed to, and then was released.
Just a standard honorable discharge.
Standard honor. Yes, it was an honorable discharge.
Okay. And after that, he took the GI Bill and went to BYU. In the vocational training. And after he got his master's at BYU, where did he go from there? Because wherever it was, it took your family all over the place. I know that much.
Well, the funny thing about it, that one was he didn't want to stay in the military because they told him where to go, and he wanted to be make his own decisions. Well, he just didn't want to be moving his family around. Like the military would require. And then he went ahead and moved his family more than the military probably would have.
Yeah.
At least that was the way it was interpreted by other members of the family.
Yeah.
I said, Elda, don't see how you stand it. All this moving around. I take it one day at a time, and it's not bad.
Yeah. So where did you live when he was going to school at BYU?
Funny, I don't remember. Part of the time, we had an apartment in my parents' home. In the basement there. And we also rented for a while from my Uncle Justin Jacobson and his wife Maureen. We had an apartment in the back of their property. And it was, I can't remember exactly where, but it was not as far north as my parents' home and a little bit east. Here in Provo. My parents' home, the address was 148 West, 960 North. And just Maureen, we're about 5th North, I think, and a little bit east.
Were any of your children born during that time?
Rosemary was born in Corpus Christi, Texas,
Uh-huh.
at the military hospital there. And then after the war was over and he was out of the service, her next child was born at Provo Regional Medical Center. What is it called now?
I think that's what it is now.
Yeah, I think that's what it was at the time. And so that's where Dennis and Eldon were born. And we were living, he was teaching out at in the Roosevelt area when Tom came along.
Yeah. I guess we should really quickly. You and George together had 12 children.
Right.
Let's really quickly just go through, in order of birth, their names that they had at birth.
Okay, we won't get them married off yet.
No, not yet.
Okay, so the first one, her name was Rosemary Thatcher, but she didn't leave it that way, but we'll let that go. And then Dennis, Eldon, and Tom, and Irene, and Kent, and Janet, and Orlin, and Ted, and Clinton, and Jim, and Sandy.
And Sandy, of course, is my mother, but your 4 girls were Rosemary, Irene, Janet, and Sandy.
Right.
And the rest were all your boys there. So.
Right.
Okay.
We specialized in boys. Oh, but our girls were super special.
Yeah. Now you said that George had got a teaching job already by the time that Tom came around. Where did you say that was again?
Out in
Roosevelt, was it?
Yeah, in the Roosevelt area. There was some things that didn't go right because we had rented a place because he was to teach at the high school was going to be made into an elementary school.
Oh, yeah?
And he was going to teach at the elementary school. But the high school didn't get ready. So we had rented a place that wasn't close to where this elementary school was, like we thought it would be. It was just across the street from where we thought the elementary school was going to be.
Yeah.
So, and that proved to be the farmer had said he would have the bathroom ready for us, but when we got there, the bathroom was full of grain. I mean, just loose wheat.
Really?
And he would let George go ahead and do the work of getting the wheat moved from there and putting the bathroom fixtures in.
Mm-hmm.
But in the meantime,
you didn't have a
it was
working
not
restroom.
Unusual to catch 5 mice in a night in our bedroom, and the children would wake up, mice running across their hands.
Oh, should have gotten yourself a tomcat.
Yeah, I should
have. Were any of your other children born while you lived there in Roosevelt?
I don't think so.
Okay. And where did you move after that?
From Roosevelt, I think we come back to Provo. And George went back to school to get his master's degree.
Mm-hmm.
But I can't remember where we lived. And that's kind of dumb. Well,
It happens. Did Irene come along during that time, or?
I don't remember where we were living when Irene was born. Oh, she was the one that was born down in Panguitch. Born at the Panguitch Hospital. He was teaching in Circleville.
Where were you living at the time?
In Circleville.
Living there in Circleville as well.
And somewhere among my things, I've got pictures of the house we lived in Circleville. But I don't know where my things are now, except that they're somewhere in Dennis's cavernous basement.
He does have a nicely sized basement for storing all the good things.
All my stuff was moved out of here, out of my house, while I was living with Max in Murray.
Yeah. But from Circleville, if I'm remembering the names right, down near the Panguitch Hospital, anyway.
Yeah.
Where did you go after that?
I think he taught school in Nephi 1 year.
Where was Kent born?
I didn't realize there was so much I'd lost. We were living in Seattle at that time. He went to work for Boeing Aircraft.
What was he doing for Boeing?
When we went up there to work for Boeing, it was going to be just for the summer, but it paid so well, and he enjoyed the work so much that he didn't go back to teaching that year. Mm-hmm. And I don't remember when he did go back to teaching, but he eventually did.
Do you remember what he was doing for Boeing?
The only thing it had to do with electronics, but I wasn't.
That's all right. Now, during this time, were you the homemaker at that entire time, or did you have some actual, or did you have other jobs that you did at any point?
No, I was an at-home mom.
And, arguably that's the best way to be. Everyone has their own circumstances, but that one seemed to work out really well for you.
Yeah, that's what I needed, to be close to my little ones.
Yeah. So Kent was born while you lived in Seattle, and George was working for Boeing. What about Janet?
Janet was born when he was teaching in Nephi.
Mm-hmm. So the teaching in Nephi happened sometime after Seattle?
Must have been. Wow.
That's all right.
It's not all right. It makes me feel I've lost a good bit of what I should be remembering.
Well, let's see. What about, let's see, who's next on our list? Orlin. Where was he born?
I'm quite sure it was here in Provo.
What had brought you back to Provo that time?
Provo was home.
What was George's job at the time that you were able to come back to Provo?
Can't remember. right at this moment. It's just not there. Maybe he was going to school on a GI Bill then at BYU.
Maybe. That's all right.
All my stuff that would help me remember these things is someplace
It's
else.
elsewhere. Yeah, that's all right. What about Ted? Where was he born?
It was here in Provo too.
So you were here in Provo, right? And I keep glancing at our list over there. Clinton?
Yeah, Clinton was here in Provo too.
Sounds like you stayed in Provo for a while at some point then. Jim?
That was up in Salt Lake. I remember remember the Dr. Benyon.
Yeah. Were you living up near Salt Lake, or was it just that your doctor was up there for that?
No, we were living in Salt Lake. George was, I don't remember what George was doing. Was that the time he was teaching at the elementary school, Ensign Elementary? That probably was then.
Yeah. And then the last one, Sandy or Sandra. Where was she born?
I think that was. I think it was here in Provo.
What her birth certificate says, so that's probably right.
Yeah, it's probably right if that's what her birth certificate said.
Huh. All right.
Janet was the one that was a cesarean birth.
Mm-hmm.
Because I was hemorrhaging, and that was the. Anyway,
Yeah.
it is considered a pretty serious complication, and George was told we'll do the best we can to save the mother, but there's not much chance that we can save the baby.
And yet, however many years later, you're both
have
still
our
here.
Janet.
All right. Well, we just have a little bit of time left, so why don't you tell me your favorite memory of you and George together?
Oh, I don't know that I pick up a particular incident, but George was always very gentle and appreciative of what I did. And he didn't hold back at all on letting people know that he really loved his wife. That's something that the children have commented on through the years. There was never any question in their mind but what their daddy loved their mother. And you've heard it from the brethren. There's no better gift that dad could give his children than to love their mother.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, that brings us to the end of this hour that we're going to spend today. And that gets us through the start of your first marriage, at least, and a little bit about your children and such. Next time, we'll probably move on in this list to kind of the more I don't know, kind of overarching stuff. Of course, we do have to still talk about Gene and Max and your time with them as well. And so that's a lot of what we'll go over next week. So thank you for watching. And Grandma, of course, thank you so much for spending the time with us and just for being you and being here.
Thank you, dear.
Life would be much more boring without you. All right.
I'm going to have to get prepared for that, dear. It's going to happen soon.
Well, it's going to happen sometime, but don't put yourself in the grave yet. All right. Thank you all.
I'm going